Welcome, everyone, to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm really happy to introduce you today to Dr. Heidi Kasevich. She is the former director of educational director at Quiet Revolution, and she now has her own company called Case Leadership, which is going to tell us about some of the strategies and tips and tools for teachers and parents working with preschoolers who have, well, we all do have introverts in our classroom or maybe our family. So her topic today is called Nurturing Quiet Kids, Setting the Stage for Introverts to Thrive. So welcome, Heidi, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So tell us, first of all, how you think introverted learners are different than extroverted children.
So this is the foundational question. We need to begin with an understanding that introversion, extroversion is a biogenetic part of our natures. Constitutes about 50% of who we are. We are born more introverted or more extroverted. And if one falls on the introverted side of the spectrum, this boils down to the fact that one is more sensitive than extroverts to stimulation from the outside world. So that could mean sensory or social stimuli. So it could be lights, could be noise, could be lots of people around. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, it's the extroverted half of the population, third to a half of the population, that is more sensitive to rewards. And this is based on a more active dopaminergic reward system in the brain. So the dopamine, one as an extrovert might get a dopamine rush at the expectation of a reward, such as getting your name in the newspaper, getting a grade, winning a medal in the track race. And the introvert is not going to get that same kind of rush or feeling of excitement. So what does this translate for learners? So our introverted learners thrive on more quiet, more minimally stimulating environments. Often our schools are crowded and noisy. The preferred social style of the introvert is a more one-on-one social style. And that's important because we often think that introverts are antisocial.
Right.
They're not. This is a stereotype, right? There is one can socialize, one can go to parties. The big difference, though, is that the introvert is going to need a place to recharge, which goes back to what I was saying about kind of thriving in that quiet, more minimally stimulating environment. That's critical for creativity. It's critical for recharging in high stimulating environments. And that's one of the things that educators really need to understand about the introvert. The third and most important aspect is, and it's related to the rewards in the environment, that introvert or more introverted child is going to need and thrive on taking time to think.
Yes.
Time to think before making decisions, before raising their hand in class. That is a critical piece. The turning inward for the processing time is going to be the more comfortable mode of participation for an introvert in any class.
Yeah, I think it's so important what you're talking about, Heidi, because as I mentioned before we started, we don't really hear much about this topic in schools, and as you said, there's a whole portion of the population that are introverts. So tell us what you think maybe are some of the character strengths that introverts have.
Yes. So a few years ago, Quiet Revolution did a really, really interesting study with the Values in Action Institute and ended up pairing an introverted temperament with their list of character strengths coming from positive psychology. They have 24. We all have greater and lesser strengths. And the 3 character strengths of introverts are humility, perspective, and prudence.
Wow.
It's related to kind of the learning style. So humility, we often think that humility, and actually kids tend to think or connect like humility with humiliation. Something that can be an automatic association that we don't even know we're making. In fact, the quiet ego is an indication of a healthy self-esteem, one that puts really others before the self, and is quite open to feedback, is very team-oriented, mission-driven person. That's humility. Perspective, and I think this is a fantastic leadership trait. I know we're going to get to that. Perspective, listening and observing first before taking action, which really leads to prudence. Prudence, I think, can also get, I like to say, a bit of a bad rap in the United States. I would love to have even little kids trying to pronounce the word prudence. I'm prudent. And prudence simply means, taking time to weigh options before making decisions. If you look at the first usage of the word prudence back in the 14th century, you get practical wisdom rooted in, acuity, right? Righteous decision making, and so taking, again, it's that time to think. So the trio, I would say, the quiet leadership trio: humility, perspective, and prudence, which is quite different from kind of an extroverted style of leadership.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. All 3 of those, I think they're so important. And like you said, sometimes they kind of get a bad rap, those kind of words. So there's something you shouldn't want when we definitely need more of that. So we have lots of preschool teachers and educators watching. So how would you, what advice can you give to them to kind of nurture those students who are more introverted in their classroom with that prudence and, to have a more reflective space in the classroom?
Yes, exactly. So I want to zone in on nurturing the character strength of prudence, and I think that language is so critical. Now we're not sort of saying, oh, the introverted learner has some sort of deficit. We're saying the introverted learner has a certain style that that is different. We have a lot of learners in our classroom, and I understand that it's complicated because we don't also want to leave our more our more outgoing, quick thinking, like processing out loud extroverts. We need to do both. So I would say that a temperament inclusive classroom has a balance between solitude and collaboration, but makes room for active listening, for writing as a form of engagement, for reflective periods before speaking, and it's one that prizes, I would say, generally speaking, quality of speech over quantity of speech.
Right.
And what I see around the country and in our classrooms is that it's the number of times one raises a hand, right, that teachers tend to look for, and they call on those who raise their hand first. Yeah. So I think holding back from doing that, it's kind of like, I like to say, hands down. We can signal other ways of engagement. And I'll say one more thing about sort of cultivating the character strength of prudence. If we zone in on prudence, I often counsel educators to think about time to think along sort of a continuum, a time continuum. So we can actively, as educators, pause 3 to 5 seconds before calling on a student. That actually provides a little bit of time to think. I personally think it should be a little bit more, kind of hands down longer. Studies show it could be 1 second and the teacher calls in the student. Yeah. So a little bit longer. I think we can bring in 1 minute. So those are along the second spectrum. We move it along to 1 minute. 1 minute metacognitive moments of pause, a reflective pausing, where we offer and invite students to write or to draw, or to just take a moment to think. That can be before class starts, in the middle of class. They can be sort of the exit ticket at the end. But studies show, and this is for introverts and extroverts alike, I would add, that metacognitive moments, 1-minute papers, if you will, enhance motivation, build self-awareness, deepen knowledge, and spark imagination. If you put all the research together, that's a lot. You want to bring in those 1-minute metacognitive moments. And I'll just leave one other strategy, which is, I love this term, beholding. So we can, if we're using, say, a PowerPoint, or we're using even a whiteboard, we can pull up like a small quotation, or it could be equation, it could be an image, and we invite students to kind of sit with it before there's a dialogue. There could be writing, there could be pairs talk, and then there could be larger group discussion. That is fundamentally kind of a think, pair, share approach. And I just want to add this concept of, we can behold. Again, it could be an image. I want to be very inclusive with the kind of teachers we have. It could be a musical, phrase, and we take that additional time for reflection, and we are building prudence in all of our students, right? Introverts and extroverts alike.
I love that, and that's one of the things that I'm always saying. I go to visit lots of schools, preschools and kindergartens in different countries, and I know I did this myself when I was a teacher. The silence is people. It's like you ask a question and answer it yourself before you've given any time of reflection. So now I really think that's a great strategy, and I never really thought about it from an introvert point of view. I was just, we're just not giving people time to think. So thank you for sharing that research with us about all the benefits that it can bring. And I love the 1-minute pause as well. I think there's such a rush in education, and we're always trying to fit more in, and it's so easy, to show a picture or even reading a story and kind of not give that time and that quiet space to reflect on what we're doing. So yeah, really, really interesting. So Heidi, tell us, sorry, did you want to say something?
I just want to say, and ultimately it comes down to a question of, depth over breadth, which is a fundamental issue that educators grapple with as they pull together their curricula for the semester, for the year. So, again, I would call for sort of balance. I understand that in some grade levels, it's going to be easier to take the deep dives and provide the moments of solitude, silent reflection, and others it's going to be harder. And I think we can step back and look holistically at our schools. Are we doing enough, like everyone all together in this, this functioning community, which is a school? So you have your individual classroom, but then I think we need as educators to team up and look again holistically. I'm a great fan of having a team, a task force of quiet ambassadors in a school who are really examining the issue again holistically. Yeah, I think that's so important. So Heidi, you mentioned about the kids who are like, pick me, and what they want to answer all the questions. So as a teacher, how do you kind of balance the participation in the class to make sure that the more introverted children are also, given an opportunity and a chance to have equal participation in things? Mm-hmm. Well, I think it begins with intentional work around, it sounds very simple, but around talking and listening and prizing both. We don't want to leave our extroverts behind. And we don't want to tell our introverts, you don't have to talk. I mean, that's going to be harder given what I said earlier about kind of stimulation and, preference for a different style of communication. But it takes work. I think you need, again, to raise that awareness about balance. There's going to be a classroom where there will be talking, there will be listening, there will be varied forms of engagement. I'm a fan of the word engagement rather than participation. And we can think of engagement as silent reflection with writing, and those words can be collected so the educator knows what's going on in the brain of the child, right? There can be pair engagement, one-on-ones. There can be large group. There can be large group discussions. We can still have our collaborative moments, as long as those are inclusive and involving this balance between listening and talking. We can, as educators, I believe, assess listening through not only written work, but through body language. I'm a big believer in sort of intentional work around body language so that an educator can know when a silence connotes engagement, rather than often what I see is that, the silence, boom, is connected with disengagement, with boredom, and it could be a lot of things. I don't want to say it only means your child is introverted.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it could be serious, right? It could be trauma, but it could be also your introvert is thinking or is actually just incredibly overstimulated at this moment and needs a little recharging time before engaging. Yeah. So thinking, again, broadly about classroom engagement and bringing that awareness to kids as early as possible. In my classroom, we think of silence as a container of meaning. You can hold up a jar.
Right.
Out of this jar comes great things, right?
Yeah. I love that. I love bringing that to young kids, and I think that's why mindfulness practices and having that kind of time to be quiet and reflect is so important in the early years classrooms.
This has actually brought back a memory from, I think, my kindergarten.
Okay. Yeah.
This is another important thing when we kind of are bringing sort of the sacredness of quiet, back into our classroom practices. I remember, quiet was always and only punitive.
Yeah.
Right? It was, you've been bad. We're sitting at these, collaborative tables. I was in that era when the walls came down. Yeah. It was only collaborative work. But if you were, like, be quiet, and the heads had to go down the table, like this.
I remember that too.
And I think almost reclaiming the word quiet again as that container of meaning, as that space for recharging, is just so important. And so the kids know it too. I mean, I think it's hard because we often say, like, be quiet.
Yeah.
Let's be quiet.
Yeah, it's a positive thing.
Thank you for bringing back that memory.
Yeah.
Get a little charge.
But it's so true. It's often used as a kind of negative thing when it has so many benefits for kids. So when kids are introverted and they're in a classroom and it can be quite stressful or produce like anxiety sometimes in children. And so what would you say that we can do to kind of help prevent kids from getting too stressed out or too anxious about going to school?
Yes. So I think it's really threefold. There needs to be self-awareness as early as possible. I think it can start at age 3. Yeah. When you can, work with the child. So on something as simple as light. How does this light make you feel, right? If there's like the fluorescent lights, or like, what makes you feel most comfortable in your own room at home? How much time do you need for downtime that involves being alone? And so just the slow awareness of one's sensitivity to stimulation, I think, can go a long way. So that's sort of one part of this, one part of answering your question. I think the second is parent support to reduce the stress and anxiety of going to, let's say the school is a crowded, noisy place where collaboration is the rule, right? That's going to be difficult for an introvert. A birthday party at age 3 that involves clowns and noise and lots of people and expectation for, jumping up and down and being really outgoing. That's going to, those environments are going to be stress inducing. So the parent is incumbent upon the parent to understand the child. And again, I think light and noise early on is a very simple way to try and get a handle on whether your child, there's so many things going on with our children. One could be the introverted temperament. And then I advise those parents to take, I mentioned this earlier, that kind of long runway approach, so that we are previewing activities. We are arriving early. I think that's critical. We are letting our kids know, not always possible for preschools, but I know there can be that time period of adjustment. Like today we're going to go for X amount of time. Tomorrow we're going to go for X amount of time. Or if it's a birthday party, we'll stay for 40 minutes and then you can go home, right? So it's a gradual assimilation, until the child can really kind of thrive on their terms. And then the third part, which is terribly critical, is the educators themselves. What kind of environments are they creating in their classrooms? What are their expectations around socializing? And my advice, which I've alluded to before, is make space for quiet. Make space for quiet reflection. Have restorative niches within your classroom. Sort of calming zones where the expectations for socializing are non-existent. Warm, calming influences, or just around like a kind of an environment that is conducive to recharging. Having a schedule that's not always, boom, 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 we're running from one thing to the next. So I think when all of those pieces work together, I think we're going to have a world in which, our introverts and extroverts and introverts can thrive.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so important, I think, in a preschool classroom where we have the learning centers and, some places parts of it can be very noisy. So you want to kind of have your quiet place, but not right beside the noisy center, right? So it's really important, the planning of the classroom environment and providing that space where kids can just go and read or just sit quietly or write, draw a picture, do what they would like.
Exactly it. And, I think rethinking the recess can be critical as well.
Okay, yeah.
So that, I think the stress and anxiety can come not only from, the high level of stimulation in our classroom environments, but also kind of, just the expectations for socializing, for being dynamic and charismatic and outgoing right off the bat, having more friends than one. And just kind of being aware that we might, as parents or as educators, be transmitting that particular set of sort of values that is going to be a stretch for an introvert.
Yeah, you meant before we started the interview, you said you often hear, oh, he or she needs to come out of his or her shell. And so I think, the words that we use as educators and the way that we kind of think about those things is so important. And even in the reporting system and the interviews that we know are happening in preschools now around the world. We need to really take into account and not just be looking for one thing. So yeah, really, really interesting discussion, Heidi. So what can you tell us a little bit? So when a child is, we mentioned like the birthday party, which we can all imagine with the trampoline and the clowns. And so how can we help our child learn to manage their own energy, maybe in that kind of setting, or, a field trip or something that might be particularly stressful for an introverted child?
Yeah, I love that you said, manage your energy. This is really the core of kind of this self-awareness. Because at the root of introversion, extroversion is energy. We can think of ourselves as sort of a battery, and based on our environment, like how quickly does our battery drain? So even that sort of metaphor can work really well. Like, how are you feeling? Are you drained? And how are you going to recharge? So for an introvert, it's very different from, recharging looks more like quiet solitude than for, an extrovert. Extrovert might need more social activity, more stimulation, more noise. So we have to, again, so as soon as possible, like, get that message about energy, that we are creatures of energy, and we need to manage it. And then the message is, you're normal, you're okay.
Yeah.
There's actually nothing wrong with you. If this is like your style of recharging is more solitary, your style of communication is more one-on-one, your working style, you prefer to be alone rather than in the setting with a lot of people. You want to take your time to think, and you don't rush decision making. Right? These are the preferences of the introverted kid, and I think getting that message across, like, it's okay.
Yeah.
And I see this oftentimes in school cafeterias, which can be really breeding grounds for stress and anxiety. And there really aren't zones in a cafeteria where one can eat alone, where alone does not mean lonely, or that you and that it's that physical space. And then you also mentioned reporting, how we write about our students, how we communicate with the parents. We can certainly take the message of, you need to speak more, your child needs to speak more, the child needs to come out of his or her shell, or their shell, out of our language.
Yeah, definitely. We see, I think I'm finding there's so much more competitive, and there's a lot of anxiety and competition in preschool, and the entrance to primary and all those kind of things. And so I think we always, I see it all the time, the parent just go up and try, you try to participate. They're really pushing their child, and you can see the child's very uncomfortable doing that. So I think this is a really important topic in education for us to really dive into and look at the classrooms and see how we are working with both types of students. So Heidi, what would you say if you're a parent or a teacher who's kind of very extroverted, and you have an introverted, like your own child is introverted? How would you advise, kind of managing the dynamics? Because as you say, it's not, we want both people to thrive, extroverts and introverts. So how do we all work together, with all these different kind of types of people in the world?
Well, it begins with really respect, understanding and respect. I like to say, we're building cultures of kindness through the lens of temperament. So we can understand that, okay, if my child doesn't want to, go to the park and go to the museum and then, go out to dinner with, a bonafide play date, with us, I'm not going to take that personally, right? I'm going to understand that my child actually needs to manage their energy differently than I do, as the extroverted parent. And it can be really hard. It can be really hard when everyone's overscheduled. But I would say, just using the weekend as an example, because this is often a very, very fraught time, for families when you have more introverted, more extroverted kids, or one parent, as you said, is more extroverted with a more introverted child. You just want different things for the weekend, and so it comes down to that understanding. I'm going to create space for you, and maybe ultimately we'll compromise. You have, Saturday could be one thing, Sunday could be another thing, and I fundamentally believe that we can find great joy as human beings in not only understanding, each other through this lens of temperament, but also in kind of stretching. And I think I mentioned the word compromise, kind of meeting each other halfway sometimes. So we're going to go to this party, but then we're going to come home, do some reading. That can be a struggle. There's a passage that I'm thinking about right now in Susan Cain's Quiet. This involves a couple, introverted, extroverted, and they're battling out like their weekend. Like, what should we do? One's sick of going out all the time. The other's like, I gotta go out. This is how I get my energy. And they compromise, and I'm loosely referring to this passage. They compromise on having a dinner party, but it's not sit down. You can kind of grab and go. It's like a buffet, and I actually love this concept for meeting each other halfway.
Awesome.
It could be a lot of people around, but you can find that one-on-one. It's kind of like the tips we give more, adults in networking. Just like a few, and then take your Irish exit. You don't have your expectations like on the extroverted scale for socializing.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't have the preschool realm now there, but sometimes it can really help you think about the adult self. It's like it's that concept of I'm going to put my own oxygen mask on first, and then I'm going to really help these little ones to navigate what's actually often a more extroverted world.
I love what you said. I think a lot of it is just being aware, right? As teachers, as parents, that there's nothing wrong with children who are display these characteristics. In fact, they have so much to offer as every child, and I love what your example of from the book about the buffet, because we can think about that in classrooms too, right? Offering those kind of opportunities where some kids maybe want to work in groups and others maybe just want to have one partner or work alone, and that's all okay. When it
comes to sharing, we can have, I still believe this in this kind of stretching for introverts, right? We can have the public speaking moment. As long as there's lots and lots of the long runway, lots and lots of preparation. But we can also have, kind of silent gallery walk where there's, some kind of, drawing or, words shared, and it's placed on the wall, and, kids can kind of walk around and take in each other's work. And it goes back to kind of hitting those both modalities. So it's more inclusive.
Yeah.
You don't have just one mode of assessment.
Yes, definitely. So Heidi, just before we finish today, are there any last tips or ideas, thoughts that you want to share with our audience? I'm sure there's a lot. But
that's such a great question. I would just sort of sum it up in 3 words. Strength, stretch, restore. This is a way we can think about creating inclusive environments for our introverts and extroverts. We want to zone in, think about the character strengths of our students, and constantly remind ourselves, that trio of humility, perspective, and prudence, all the while knowing that our extroverts, are going to be, if you look at their character strengths, more enthusiastic, for one, and that's okay. But strength, and then this concept of stretching, we can scaffold meaningful stretches for introverts and extroverts alike, more talking, more listening. And then the concept of restoring. We need to restore, we need to manage our energy, and helping ourselves and our kids understand this battery, and this human battery that we are, and help one another to manage our energy better. And I really do mean that, help one another, because we can. To me, this movement of quiet is really about building those cultures of kindness. So I would sort of end with that note.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all those really practical ideas and the research, and really inspiring discussion. I think I feel inspired by you, and thinking about how we can include everyone. I like what you said, inclusive, and making sure that we really value each person for who they are, and at home and in the classroom. So thank you again, Heidi, for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Great.